Hi, I'm Sarah Glassberg,
I'm Brad Pilcher.
and this is HAFF in Conversation, the Jewish film podcast.
And it's June, so Sarah, that means that I just got done writing the What to Watch article for June this month. It's the beginning of the month when we're recording this, and I literally, like last night, finished going through the list of all the films that are coming out this month to try to curate a little list. So I'm very excited to talk about that with you. I don't know how excited you are to talk about film. I think you're probably pretty excited to talk about film. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing this podcast with me.
Yep, you said it. I mean, there's always amazing content coming out that's new, that's classic. I think you mentioned to me offline that, there are a lot of classics coming to Blu-ray and DVD and streaming and all of the things. So, if anyone who doesn't like the heat of Atlanta summers or wherever you are listening to this, you can just be in your air-conditioned home still watching amazing films that happen to have something Jewish about them.
Yes, there's definitely a theme to this month. Every month is a little different. This month, there's just a lot of Jewish classic films, and not classic in the like very, very old sense, but just like genuinely iconic films that are coming on demand to a whole host of services. And I was really excited to be able to use that as an excuse to hawk some of these films to people who may not have seen them before. But before we get into that particular theme, there was actually one film that popped up on my radar. It's not coming on demand. It's coming to theaters, which I know is weird, but the pandemic is slowly lifting. People are going back into the theaters. And this month, on June 18th specifically, there is a film coming out, and it popped up on my radar because it's from the filmmaker Edgar Wright, who did Shaun of the Dead and Baby Driver and other films that I am a huge fan of. But this is not a film like anyone he's ever made before. It's actually a documentary. It's his first documentary, and it's about a subject I know nothing about. There's a band, apparently, called Sparks, and it's Jewish brothers, Ron and Russell Mael, I think is how you pronounce their names. I don't know anything about this film, but I don't know if you've seen it or heard about it, but it has a huge list of notable people, from Neil Gaiman to Jason Schwartzman to Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers and Beck. All of these people are apparently super fans of Sparks, and Edgar Wright is also apparently a super fan of Sparks. Do you know anything about this movie? Because I don't.
Yes, I'm so excited that we are highlighting this film. I went into this film, basically just had the opportunity to preview it to see if there was any, strong Jewish content as we are looking at, different programming opportunities. And I went into it not knowing this band at all. I heard about this documentary same way as you. I love Edgar Wright. He's one of my favorite filmmakers. And I was like, oh, this is so strange. This band has been around for 50 years, 25 albums, all of these amazing Jewish and non-Jewish actors and musicians, everyone from like Jason Schwartzman, Jack Antonoff, Neil Gaiman, like all Flea, Beck, like everyone you could think of under the sun who loves this band. And yet so many of us don't know this band. And I went into it thinking like, how is that possible? Like, how have I never heard of them? Knowing really nothing beyond just what I read about it. And I think it's a mark of a really, really strong documentary, a really visionary, confident filmmaker to make a documentary that is engaging and interesting and entertaining and creative, about a subject that you know nothing about. And yet by the end of the film, I was like, I am a fan of this band. I am all in. Like, I learned something. I was just completely entertained for the whole thing. And again, if you go into a documentary not really having much at all to grasp onto that you're already aware of or a fan of or whatever, and to have it just completely hook you like that, I mean, this film is incredible. And I don't say that a lot about documentaries. Like, I'm kind of picky with documentaries. It's not my instinct to necessarily seek them out as much as other people might. And this one is just like phenomenal. I can't praise it enough. And I definitely think people should check it out if you're even remotely into music, even if you don't know the Sparks brothers at all. I didn't. And again, I loved it.
What's the music sound like?
Well, that's the really interesting thing. They continuously changed their sound. Like over the years, they had different band members, they tried different genres. I mean, not vastly different. They're kind of, I guess you could say they started out in sort of this psychedelic, almost British pop rock, like new wave kind of genre. Again, they kind of, it's hard to explain. I mean, they're from California, but in the film they talk a lot about how a lot of people thought they were a British band. So if that gives you some context for their
Oh
early
God.
sound.
Wow.
Yeah, they just kept reinventing themselves. And the film does a really good job of showing you those evolutions, different music videos, different performances, interviews with like different again, famous fans of theirs, different band members over the years. And then it brings you right up to the present day. I don't know if, any listeners are a fan of the French filmmaker, I always mispronounce his name, Leos Carax, who did Holy Motors. And he has this new film called Annette coming out with Marion Cotillard and Adam Driver and Simon Helberg, great Jewish actor as well in the cast. And it's the Sparks story. Like they wrote the story, the music, and for film lovers too, I should mention, like this is really exciting for them because they, in the documentary, you see like how much they always loved film and wanted to kind of break into that. And so I was already excited for that movie, and then finding out like, okay, this band was involved in that project, like it just put a cherry on top of it for me. Like I'm so excited for that. I was so excited to learn about these crazy visionary artists that I didn't know about. So
Well, first of all, if you've seen Holy Motors, you're in rarefied company because that is an independent film's independent film. I love the filmmaker, love that film. It is weird. So I'm even more interested now in the Sparks, knowing that they're collaborating in that way. I mean, look, it's interesting. I love music, but I don't know the Sparks. I'm curious, and maybe you can tell me. I'm more curious just as a fan of Edgar Wright because he has a very, 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 very particular style of filmmaking. People who have seen his films, Baby Driver, Shaun of the Dead, they know that style, those whip cuts, and just he has a very, very unique visual sensibility. Those are all narrative films. This is a documentary. So I mean, I'm curious. Do the Edgar Wrightisms come out in the film? Do you really feel like you're watching an Edgar Wright film when you're watching this?
I'd say so. And that manifests in a couple different ways. So first of all, he kind of, you hear him doing some of the it's not very stuffy. It's not very like traditional of a documentary. So even though when you do have these talking heads, like sometimes Edgar Wright will pop in or you'll hear him in the background. And he has a very distinct accent and way of speaking, and you hear his laughter. So there's a kind of I don't want to say casualness, but I think there's a spirit that he brings to all his films. And so even just having him kind of around, inserting himself a little bit, it reminds you that he's the person behind this. But even beyond that, I mean, so many of his films, Baby Driver, a scene from Shaun of the Dead I'm thinking of, or Scott Pilgrim versus the World, like he has a musicality to all of his narrative films. There's always a rhythm to it. Oftentimes it's very overtly like a rhythm, the rhythm of a song playing, and
Yeah,
the action
he makes musicals without making musicals.
Exactly, yeah. And so this film, I can't even necessarily describe why. It's kind of ineffable, but it has that feeling to it. And maybe that's because you hear so much of Sparks' music throughout it, and so it's just editing around their music and music videos and performances, like I said. But I just think it makes a lot of sense for him to have this be his first documentary because it is about music, and that is such an influence on his narrative films. So I think you do feel it, but I think it's also just nice to kind of have that connection and know how much this band meant to him. And you then can trace a through line of, why music is so integral to his narrative films. So, yeah.
Well, it's Edgar Wright. It's coming out in theaters June 18th. So I am sold. I will be there. If you are a fan of Sparks, if you are a fan of music, if you are a fan of Edgar Wright, if you're just a fan of going to the theater and watching great movies and great documentaries, then you should definitely check out the Sparks Brothers. But now we're going to pivot into some films that I've actually seen. So hopefully I can bring more to the table, because there are just a number, as I said, of great classic films coming out on demand to various services: Hulu, Netflix, Amazon Prime. The first on the list is a beautiful little weird film. Sarah, are you a fan of Charlie Kaufman?
I am. It's surprising that I actually have not seen this film. It's on my
Adaptation
list. Yep,
is the name of the film.
adaptation. One of my husband's favorites. He likes really odd, somewhat trippy films. So he really likes this film. I really can't believe I've never seen it. I don't have an excuse. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is my number one favorite film of all time. So, I definitely have some catching up to do, but I mean, even from that alone, I am a fan, and I'm a little aware of this movie and why it's awesome. But I just have to watch it. Got to get
It is
down to
awesome.
it.
Yeah, it is awesome, and you have a great excuse to catch up because it's coming to Amazon Prime this month. It is the follow up after Being John Malkovich, which is kind of the film that put Charlie Kaufman on the map, and it's weird. So the backstory on this film, to be clear, was Charlie Kaufman was hired to adapt. I think it was a novel, and he very quickly realized that he wasn't going to be able to figure out how to do that. He just didn't feel like he had it in him. So instead, he wrote this story about a screenwriter, a New York Jew, like basically himself, trying to adapt this novel. And he did not tell the studio this is what he was doing. He basically wrote the screenplay and then came to them, and because he was afraid to pitch to them that this is what he was doing, he's like, they'll kill it. So he just wrote the whole screenplay and he brought it to them and he said, okay, this is what I did. And to his great surprise, the studio was like, that's great. And they fast tracked the film, and that became adaptation. He actually, in the film, there's the protagonist, played by Nicolas Cage, is twins. They're twins. And so he created this fictional twin for himself who got screenwriting credit. So it's weird. It's just a weird film all around, but it is quirky. It is probably the best. If Woody Allen is problematic to you these days, but you still like that kind of neurotic Jewish auteur shtick, this is the film for you. Because it makes fun of itself. It is self-deprecating. There's this hilarious scene where the protagonist, the screenwriter, goes to like a screenwriting seminar, and he doesn't want to be there. He thinks it's beneath him, and there's a voiceover, which is basically his internal monologue going on in his head. And like halfway through this the guy on stage in the screenwriting seminar starts like wailing on how lazy it is to use voiceover in film, and the actor, the character, kind of slinks down in his chair because he realizes that his internal monologue was a voice. It's that kind of like self-aware, self-deprecating humor that, as I describe it, doesn't work, but in the film probably shouldn't work, but it does. It's perfectly executed. If you like Charlie Kaufman's other films, if you like weird, quirky, independent films that were produced by major studios with decent budgets and a lot of star power, back when that was a thing that actually happened, 2002, not that long ago, Adaptation is a film that is highly recommended. Is coming to Amazon Prime. And Sarah, you have to watch. You call yourself a film cinephile.
Yeah, and a Charlie Kaufman fan. No, I 100% plan to watch it, and I know it's a film that my husband would gladly watch again. So, maybe that's something that we will take some time to do this weekend, because we are not yet venturing out into theaters. We just did a drive-in movie last weekend, but not quite at theaters yet. So perfect opportunity. And there are other things coming to Amazon Prime, but also Hulu. This next film is actually coming to both platforms. So if you have either,
it is, and it's totally unlike Adaptation. For starters, it's a Seth Rogen film, which should immediately take you into more mainstream territory. The film is 50-50, which is on the surface not a super Jewish film. Certainly, Seth Rogen has made more overtly Jewish films, but this is actually, the backstory on this film is fascinating to me. Seth Rogen has a writing partner, Will Reiser, and they worked together on the Ali G show, which was Sacha Baron Cohen's show before he did Borat, before he became huge. And they became fast friends. And at the time, Will Reiser was dealing with cancer. Didn't realize it, got diagnosed with really bad cancer, was able to successfully fight it. And this film is basically that story. And they basically told that story. And Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays the Will Reiser character. Seth Rogen plays the Seth Rogen character. And it's just funny. It's funny, but it's also sad. It's serious. It got a lot of heat from people who didn't see it, I think, and immediately saw Seth Rogen is making a comedy about cancer. And I've got friends and family who had cancer, who died of cancer, and how dare you? It's not that kind of film. It's just genuinely funny, and I recommend it as a sort of under the radar pick to anybody. And you can, also regale your friends and family with your trivia knowledge about the backstory on the film. They actually made a point of not a lot of films that deal with these kinds of, you're dying, you have a terminal illness. There's a lot of religion that gets injected into that. Suddenly people find God. They were like, no, we wouldn't find, that's not how we would operate. And so, the characters are Jewish. They're not overtly Jewish, but they also go out of their way not to inject any kind of like religiosity into it. And they were very conscious of it. It's just a smart film. I can't recommend it enough. I don't know if have you seen it, Sarah?
This is another one where I honestly can't believe that I have not seen it. Like I usually, always used to kind of seek out comedies, Seth Rogen movies. I think Joseph Gordon-Levitt is a really underrated actor. And this is from a director who, if I'm not mistaken, has done a lot of other comedies that I love, a lot of other films with Jewish themes or Jewish characters. I'm just thinking about The Night Before, which is a holiday movie I have talked about on this podcast. And I knew that, he had directed this prior to that. And yet I just never went back into his sort of filmography and caught up on this one. But I've heard great things. I've heard that it's very poignant. It's not what you'd expect. I think there are a lot of examples in Seth Rogen's career of things that are a little bit mismarketed based on who he is as an actor. So this might have been one of those. I can't remember. Definitely not an excuse, though, for me to have not seen this just based on all of that. So I'll seek it out on one of those platforms.
Yeah, it did not do great box office. It was not well marketed. It like I said, it did have a little bit of a backlash, but it's a good movie. And there's a great article, we'll link to it in the show notes, from I think the Jewish Journal in LA, with an interview with both Rogen and Reiser talking about this film and talking about the director and how he got the project. And there's a great quote in there from the director where he sort of said, "It's not just that I'm Jewish and I like to smoke a bong that I want to direct this movie," which is like, for a director trying to pitch himself for a Seth Rogen movie is a pretty good line. Anyways, 50/50. It's coming to Amazon Prime and Hulu. So if you have one of those services, you're set. There's another film that's coming to Hulu this month, which is a modern day remake of a classic TV series. Those always go well. This one didn't go that well at the box office. It's called Get Smart, and it was helmed by Steve Carell. It had Anne Hathaway in it as well. It's a campy spoof. It actually is interesting. It came out the same summer as another Jewish spy film, Don't Mess with the Zohan. So apparently that year was like the year for Jewish spy flicks. This one, though, is interesting to me because it's a remake of a Mel Brooks TV show. Mel Brooks and Buck Henry created this show back in the 60s. And it was at a time when being Jewish wasn't something that you necessarily advertised quite as much. And so, like, the character is Jewish. The character is very covert Jewish. There's a lot of, like, humor from that era. So I actually prefer the TV show. But the movie's good. The movie, like I said, it didn't perform supremely well at the box office. But it's a Steve Carell comedy. I mean, come on. Like, it's just, what's not to like about that? If you want to do a double feature, watch it with Don't Mess with the Zohan and relive that summer of Jewish spy films. It's just funny. It's clever. It updates the technology. Doesn't update the humor as much, which is probably its failing, because humor that worked better in the late 60s, early 70s probably doesn't work as well in the 2000s. But it's still a good movie. It's still funny. It's Jewish. What do you want?
I saw this movie in the movies and I really liked it. I mean, I I'm thinking I was probably in high school maybe, and I was a huge Steve Carell fan, still am. And I didn't actually have that familiarity with the show. My parents did, and I think that made them a little more disappointed in it. But here I am just being like, this is silly and this is fun. And Steve Carell is always just a delight to watch. I'll basically watch him in anything. So I agree with you. I think it's fun. I haven't seen Don't Mess with the Zohan. Adam Sandler movies are not always, the most well received in recent years, and I certainly haven't sought them out. But I don't know, maybe that could be a fun double feature if just if that's your thing, just kind of silliness for a night with a little bit of Jewishness thrown in there and spy themes. Yeah, it could be fun.
Get Smart is smarter than Don't Mess with the Zohan, in my opinion. Don't Mess with the Zohan is just, it's trading on Adam Sandler's accent work and physical comedy. But it's, if that's your cup of tea, then by all means. The thing about Get Smart, which I understand probably why your parents were disappointed, is it didn't go far enough in modernizing it. If it had decided to modernize the humor as well and modernize the tone as well as the technology, probably would have landed better. But it really just modernized the tech. It moved it to the modern day. But the sort of covert Jewish angst, just it read more authentic in the '60s and '70s. But it still works, and I think that the film is carried by the performances. Steve Carell's energy is what really carries the film, in my opinion. It's good. It's funny. I recommend it. Now, the last two films on the list are unquestionable classics. Like the films we've talked about, they're classic. They have a certain place in the Jewish pantheon. You may not have seen them. These last two films are unquestionable. They have been given awards. They have built cult followings. They are amazing. One is coming to Netflix. One is coming to Hulu. The first one is The Big Lebowski. It's coming to Netflix. Sarah, do you roll on Shabbos?
I love this movie so much. I don't even know where to start. I mean, that there's so many iconic lines. I'm glad you threw that one out there first. Gosh, no one makes movies like the Coen brothers, just iconically Jewish filmmakers in a lot of ways, maybe not in all their films, but this one is just, yeah, where do we even start on The Big Lebowski, right? Like
you start with John Goodman. Come on.
I guess, but you might as well also start with the dude, he's
well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the dude is great. The dude abides. No questioning the dude. Philip Seymour Hoffman is amazing. And I mean, it's great all around. It is very Coen brothers. It is a very indie sensibility feeling. They Coen brothers eventually kind of moved into a place in the mainstream and they started making films that were a little bit less quirky. They were still Coen brothers movies, but a film like True Grit is a different kind of film than The Big Lebowski, which was a little earlier in their career. But for me, I just, all of the stuff with the dude and the rug and those were great. But I always loved the interaction between the characters at the bowling alley and, John Goodman playing Walter, the Vietnam vet who clearly needed to be in therapy for PTSD, as a Jewish convert who doesn't fucking roll on Shabbos and will make that very clear to you at any time with a handgun if necessary. It's just those were some of the best scenes. Steve Buscemi and John Goodman and all of those characters kind of playing off each other. I just that is the parts of the film that I remember immediately. I go to. How can you not love The Big Lebowski? And if you haven't seen it, how can you not have seen The Big Lebowski?
Yeah. Yeah. John Turturro is also great in it. Just, yeah. This is a movie that my husband does not like, and we argue about it all the time. Yeah. He really, really disliked it. So don't trust his opinion. Trust ours, everybody, if you have not seen The Big Lebowski. In this case, yeah, trust us. It is odd. Like a lot of the films we've been talking about today are, some of them are a little more Hollywood, but some of them are a little offbeat. But I think if you've seen any Coen brothers movie, and you haven't seen this, that's surprising. But just if you know them as filmmakers at all, I think you can kind of get behind the strangeness of this one. And what's remarkable to me is that it is strange, but it just has become such a classic, a cult classic. Just people again, endlessly quote it. It's
There are
just influenced so
conferences where people
much. Yep.
come together just to celebrate this movie.
Yeah. So I didn't even know
It's
where to start with it, but it's just
I,
great.
I don't know what to say to your
Right.
husband now. I mean,
Yeah.
like the next time I see him, I'm going to be like, I don't know what to say to you. I now know that you don't like The Big Lebowski. I mean, it is. I think it is unquestionably the weirdest Coen Brothers movie. It is a film about a guy who does drive. I mean, there's lots of little trippy scenes and sequences,
Yep.
but it's so good. If you haven't seen it, it's coming to Netflix. Let me just put a big giant exclamation on point on this. It's coming to Netflix. Go watch it. It's The Big Lebowski. Um, the last film we want to talk about is not as much of a cult film, but it did win the Academy Award for Best Picture. It did win the Academy Award for Best Director. It won 3 or 4 other Academy Awards back in 1980 when I was born. Robert Redford directed it. Mary Tyler Moore was in it. Judd Hirsch is in it. Um, it's called Ordinary People. If you haven't seen it, you really, really should. It's actually one of those sort of films that hit at its time. It was really, really well known. It was really celebrated. People have forgotten about it. I think it's one of those mid-budget kind of films that Hollywood doesn't make anymore. But I think Tablet Magazine put it best when they said it was, quote, American cinema's iconic, triumphant case for the life-saving superiority of Jewish emotionalism over waspy repression, unquote, which is a great line and I think a great description of this film because Judd Hirsch plays perfectly this sort of understanding, cardigan wearing Jewish psychiatrist, and Mary Tyler Moore plays completely against type. She plays this kind of ice cold wasp mother who does not understand her son, who is blaming himself and feeling guilty over the accidental death of his brother, who he thinks his mother loved more than him. She probably did love the older brother more than him. And so you have this kind of battle between the mother, who's sort of repressing all of the feelings, and her husband, who's sort of encouraging their son, their son who is still alive, to go to therapy. And Judd Hirsch plays a therapist. It's just a beautiful little character piece. Robert Redford, I don't think it was his first directorial film, but it was one of those films where Robert Redford was sort of coming into his own as a director, I think. And it's just a great film, and it's coming to Hulu. It's called Ordinary People. It's wonderful. Sarah, have you actually ever seen this one?
I haven't. It's another classic that I'm very aware of. I'm very embarrassed often to say that that I haven't seen this, but I think that's the greatest thing about these films kind of having a second or third or fourth life on streaming. It just brings these classic films to new audiences, myself included. I definitely am the first to admit when there are classics I haven't seen, and this is just one of them, unfortunately. I mean, Mary Tyler Moore is incredible, obviously, so that's one of the few things I always sort of knew about it, that she was in it and that Robert Redford directed it, but I would have never even known the Jewishness of it. That's how kind of far removed I was from what this film is about and what it has to offer. So
Yeah.
I will be among any listeners who are checking that out on Hulu, whether it's a rewatch for you or first time for me. And
Yeah, I
yeah.
feel bad. This episode was not intended to embarrass you about all the films that you have not seen.
Oh my goodness. No, it's all good. We were able to, I was able to talk about the Sparks Brothers and Big Lebowski. So, I'm happy. And Get Smart, a film that I completely forgot about, quite honestly. So lots in here
Yeah,
that I was happy
yeah.
to talk about.
Get Smart was good. Ordinary People is a throwback. The reason I'm so encouraging of people to go watch it is because it is the kind of film that you never would get made today. It might get made on Netflix, but even then, it's questionable because it's like a stage play. It's not doesn't read like a stage play. It's really a well shot film. But it's the premise of it is a stage play premise, frankly. But Judd Hirsch is amazing, and Mary Tyler Moore. They didn't actually win. That was the worst part. They both Judd Hirsch got nominated for an Oscar, and Mary Tyler Moore got nominated for an Oscar, and they did not win. Two other actors in the film won Oscars. Robert Redford won director. The film itself won Best Picture. There was another category, I can't remember what it was, that won, but they didn't win, and I am furious because to my mind, the Judd Hirsch performance and the Mary Tyler Moore performance were actually the best in the film, because Judd Hirsch is just amazingly sort of encapsulates. Judd Hirsch at that point was really well known for playing kind of sarcastic characters. but and obviously would continue to play sarcastic characters if you've ever seen films like Independence Day, where he plays the father of Jeff Goldblum. But like in this film, he's just a Jewish psychiatrist, and he's a warm character. He's a supportive character. He plays a little bit against type, and Mary Tyler Moore is so against type because she was this bubbly, loving character in all of the stuff that she was most well known for. But in this one, you would never, you would watch this film if you'd never heard of Mary Tyler Moore. And if I told you after you watched this movie, oh yeah, she was like America's sweetheart. She was, Mary Tyler Moore show and the Dick Van Dyke show, you'd never believe it. In a million years, you'd never believe it. She's so good in this. So anyways, Ordinary People, that's the last film on the list. That's your list for June, guys. It's an incredible lineup. There are other films we could have put on here. There's honorable mentions. I think Clueless is coming to one of the streaming platforms that it wasn't already on. It's just a great month for Jewish film. So you have no excuse, whether you want to go to a theater or not. Tons of stuff to watch. I encourage you to watch, and let us know what you think. Email us at inconversation@ajff.org. Let us know what you think about these films or any other films.
Yes, definitely encourage you all to give us your unpopular opinions and your, things that you agreed with, films that you didn't hear us talk about or see on our list. We definitely want to hear from you. But until next time, we are your hosts, Sarah Glassberg
and Brad Pilcher.
Also producing is Chris Holland, our technical director and editor.
The music you're humming to right as I'm talking is by the incomparable Joe Alterman. Please look him up wherever you get your music.
You can always find more from us as well as show notes at ajff.org/inconversation. As Brad mentioned, our email address is inconversation@ajff.org. Please do drop us a line with questions, comments. We might just answer or include those in future episodes.
Don't forget to subscribe in your podcast app of choice or check out our YouTube channel for new episodes. Give us a rating, give us a review. Every little bit helps.
We should also mention that we can't continue to do this podcast or any of our other digital programs without your support. If you are willing, please consider making a donation at ajff.org/inconversation. And of course, please tell your friends about the show. Until next time, goodbye.